For 22 years, I sat in an office just like your doctor's office, and I told people like you things I now know were dangerously incomplete. I am Dr. John Marston, a functional and integrative medicine physician, and I walked away from conventional clinical practice not because I stopped caring about patients, but because I finally understood that the system I was operating inside was never designed to protect the most vulnerable hours of your day. It was designed to respond to emergencies after they happened, to manage the wreckage, to hand you a prescription and send you back into the same morning routine that was quietly loading the gun. I followed the guidelines. I prescribed the beta blockers and the statins and the blood pressure medications. I told my patients to take their medications in the morning, to exercise first thing, to start the day with energy and intention. I said these things because that is what I was trained to say. And I watched people who were doing everything I told them to do, people who were compliant, people who trusted me, suffer heart attacks before breakfast, arrhythmias before 9 a.m., falls that broke hips, fractured lives, ended independence. And it was not until I sat across from the daughter of a man I'll call RT, a 68-year-old retired civil engineer from Western Pennsylvania who had done everything right, absolutely everything right, that I finally stopped defending the system and started asking why the deadliest window of every single day was the window nobody in medicine was seriously talking about. What I am about to share with you is not in any pamphlet your cardiologist hands you. It is not in the standard discharge instructions from the emergency department. It is buried in cardiovascular research that was published in peer-reviewed journals, replicated across populations, discussed in academic corridors, and then functionally ignored because there is no pharmaceutical product to sell alongside it, no patent to file, no sales representative to walk it into your doctor's office with a branded pen and a lunch order. Every single morning that you wake up and move through the first 60 minutes of your day the way most Americans move through them, your cardiovascular system is being asked to perform under conditions it was never designed to handle all at once. And the damage from that is not theoretical. It is cumulative. It is structural. And for a significant portion of the people watching this video right now, it is already underway. The first case I need to tell you about is Case File 2019, a 71-year-old retired school teacher from Central Ohio. I'll refer to her as MV to protect her privacy. MV had been managing hypertension for 11 years. Her chart showed lisinopril, 20 milligrams daily, amlodipine, 5 milligrams daily, and a low-dose aspirin regimen her primary care physician had recommended after her cholesterol panel came back elevated in 2014. She was a model patient. She took every pill at the same time every morning, 7:15 a.m., because her cardiologist told her morning dosing helped maintain consistent daytime coverage. She walked 3 miles every morning, beginning at 6:30 a.m. immediately after rising. She drank black coffee before she left the house because she had read that caffeine before exercise improved performance and she wanted to make the most of her walk. She had a cold rinse at the end of every shower because she had heard it was good for circulation. By every metric on paper, and I want you to hear this clearly, MV was a success story. Her physician's notes from a 2018 visit describe her as an engaged, health-conscious patient with well-managed hypertension. 8 months later, MV suffered a hypertensive crisis at 7:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that resulted in a hemorrhagic stroke. She survived, but she lost significant function on her left side, and the woman who walked 3 miles every morning never walked unassisted again. Her daughter called me 6 weeks after it happened. She said, her doctors keep saying it was just bad luck, but she did everything they told her to do. How does that happen? And the answer to that question is exactly what I am going to give you today. Because what happened to MV was not bad luck. It was a collision of 5 simultaneous physiological pressures that her morning routine was stacking, one on top of another, during the most cardiovascular vulnerable window of every human day. And not one person in her medical team had ever mapped those pressures together and told her what they were doing to her at 6:30 in the morning. Drop a 1 in the comments right now if you or someone you love takes blood pressure medication and still starts the morning with exercise, coffee, or a cold shower before giving the body even 15 minutes to transition from sleep. Because what I am about to show you about what is happening inside your cardiovascular system in that first hour will fundamentally change how you understand your mornings. I am not going to give you the protocol yet. Before I do that, you need to understand the architecture of what is actually happening inside your body during those first 60 minutes. Because the protocol only makes sense, only works the way the research shows it works. Once you see the biological mechanisms you are either managing or ignoring every single morning you wake up. Here is what is actually happening inside your body between the moment your eyes open and the moment you finish your first cup of coffee. And I need you to understand this as a system, not as individual variables, but as a cascade, because that is precisely what it is. The standard explanation you will hear from most physicians is that morning cardiovascular risk is simply a function of circadian rhythm, that the body naturally elevates certain hormones upon waking, that blood pressure rises as part of a normal transition, and that this is expected, managed, and not particularly alarming in a medicated patient. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But here is what that explanation ignores completely. The body does not activate one system at a time. It activates all of them simultaneously, and when you layer behavioral stressors on top of simultaneous biological activations, you are no longer talking about a gradual, manageable transition. You are talking about a structural loading event, and your cardiovascular system is the load-bearing wall. Think of your arterial system the way a structural engineer thinks about a building designed to carry a specific maximum load. That building can handle its design load. It was built for it. But the design specifications assume the load arrives gradually, distributed across the structure, with each support element activating in sequence. What happens in the first 60 minutes of most people's mornings is the equivalent of dropping the entire maximum load onto one corner of the building simultaneously. The moment you wake, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis fires and cortisol begins rising. Cortisol, which increases vascular resistance by activating mineralocorticoid receptors in the blood vessel walls, causing them to retain sodium and constrict. Simultaneously, your sympathetic nervous system activates, releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine, adrenaline, which elevate heart rate and further constrict peripheral vasculature. And here's the piece that makes all of this dangerous in a way your doctor has almost certainly never explained to you. Your blood plasma volume is at its lowest point of the entire day when you wake up. 6 to 8 hours without fluid intake means the bloodstream is running thicker, more viscous, which means the heart must generate more force to move blood through vessels that are simultaneously constricting from cortisol and sympathetic activation. That is not one crack in the foundation. That is 3 load-bearing walls failing at the same moment, and into this environment, this already compromised structural state, most Americans walk a cold shower, a cup of black coffee on an empty stomach, and a brisk walk or a run. This brings me to Case File 2021. A 64-year-old former logistics manager from northern Georgia, I'll call him Dr., had no diagnosed cardiovascular disease. His last annual physical, 8 months before the event, showed borderline high blood pressure, 138/88, which his physician characterized as something to watch and addressed with lifestyle counseling rather than medication. Dr. was proactive. He started a morning fitness routine, up at 5:45 a.m., cold shower to wake up fully, 2 cups of coffee, out the door for a 40-minute run by 6:20. On a Wednesday morning in March, 23 minutes into his run, Dr. went into ventricular fibrillation. He was found by another runner. He survived because that runner happened to be an off-duty paramedic. His electrophysiologist later told his wife that the event was unpredictable. I want you to sit with that word, unpredictable, because when you understand what I am about to explain about the second mechanism, you will see that what happened to Dr. was not unpredictable at all. It was the predictable outcome of stacking every possible morning cardiovascular stressor into a 35-minute window in a man whose vascular system had already begun showing signs of structural compromise. The second mechanism is one that I genuinely believe is the most underappreciated cardiovascular risk factor in all of morning physiology, and it involves something called orthostatic vascular response. Specifically, what happens to that response when it is rushed, chemically disrupted, and thermally shocked before it has completed its natural activation sequence. The standard medical explanation for orthostatic hypotension, the blood pressure drop that happens when you stand up quickly, is that it is a simple mechanical issue, a lag in baroreceptor signaling that is more common in older adults, managed with slow positional changes and adequate hydration. And again, that explanation is not wrong. It is just catastrophically incomplete. Think of your baroreceptor system, the pressure sensors embedded in your carotid arteries and aortic arch that communicate blood pressure status to your brainstem, as the electrical inspection panel of a building. In a properly functioning system, the moment that panel detects a pressure drop, it sends immediate signals to increase heart rate, constrict peripheral vessels, and redistribute blood volume toward the brain and vital organs. That is an elegant, precisely calibrated system. But here is what happens to that inspection panel when you have been lying horizontal for 7 hours, when your plasma volume is depleted, when cortisol and norepinephrine are simultaneously spiking, and when you stand up abruptly and immediately introduce caffeine. The panel is being asked to run a full emergency inspection while the wiring is corroded, the circuit breakers are already partially tripped, and someone just introduced a 200 milligram stimulant surge into the electrical load. A 2017 analysis published in the Journal of the American Heart Association, a study that followed 11,369 middle-aged adults over 25 years, found that orthostatic hypotension in midlife was associated with a 54% higher risk of heart failure and a 36% higher risk of coronary heart disease over the follow-up period. 54%. That is not a marginal finding. That is the difference between a man who dances at his daughter's wedding and one who does not make it to the venue. And the research was published. It was replicated. And the standard clinical response has been to tell patients to stand up slowly, as if a 2-second behavioral adjustment addresses a systemic vascular architecture problem that has been building for years. Here is what the research actually shows needs to happen, and I will give you the exact protocol in the next section. But first, I need you to understand the third mechanism, because without this piece, the protocol is only half as effective. Comment the number 2 in the section below if your doctor has ever told you that morning dizziness, heart pounding upon waking, or a racing pulse before 9 a.m. is just normal aging or anxiety. Because I need you to understand that those are not symptoms of aging. Those are warning signals from a cardiovascular system that is being overwhelmed at the exact moment of its greatest daily vulnerability. And put a 3 in the comments if you have ever taken your blood pressure medication first thing in the morning and then immediately had coffee or gone for a run. Because the interaction between those two behaviors and the biological state I have just described to you is something that the prescribing physician almost certainly never discussed with you, and it is critical context for everything I am about to give you in the protocol. The third mechanism involves the thermal vascular response, specifically the effect of acute cold exposure on a vascular system that is already in a state of sympathetic activation and reduced plasma volume. And what I am about to show you about what cold does to coronary perfusion pressure in that specific biological window will fundamentally change the way you think about the first 15 minutes after you wake up for the rest of your life. The protocol I am about to give you is not complicated, it is specific. And the specificity is everything. Because the mistake I watched patients make for years was taking general wellness advice and applying it to a biological window that requires precision, not generality. And the difference between those two approaches is the difference between genuinely protecting your cardiovascular system during its most vulnerable daily period and performing a ritual that feels healthy while quietly adding structural stress to an already loaded system. The first component of this protocol is what I call the 15-minute transition window, and I need you to understand the mechanism before I give you the implementation, because if you understand why this works, you will never skip it. When you wake, your cortisol is rising, your sympathetic nervous system is activating, your plasma volume is at its daily minimum, and your baroreceptor system, that electrical inspection panel I described, is running its first full load assessment after 7 hours of reduced demand operation. The research-supported approach is to allow the body to complete the initial orthostatic calibration before introducing any additional physiological demands. This means the first thing you do upon waking is not stand. You sit up at the edge of the bed. You remain there for 90 seconds to 3 minutes. This is not a comfort suggestion. This is a vascular architecture intervention. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Clinical Hypertension followed 340 adults over the age of 55 with documented morning blood pressure surges and found that a structured, slow-rise protocol, sitting upright for a minimum of 2 minutes before standing, reduced the incidence of orthostatic hypotension events by 38% compared to the control group that rose immediately. 38% reduction. From sitting on the edge of your bed for 2 minutes. That study received almost no mainstream attention because there is nothing to sell alongside it. The second component is hydration, and the form and timing of this hydration matters in ways that most people have never been told. The goal is not simply to drink water. The goal is to restore plasma osmolality, the concentration balance of your blood, before the cardiovascular system is asked to perform under load. The research-supported approach is 12 to 16 ounces of room temperature water consumed within the first 10 minutes of waking, before caffeine, before food, before movement. Room temperature specifically, not ice cold, because cold fluid ingestion triggers a vagal response that can produce transient bradycardia in susceptible individuals, and in a system already navigating sympathetic activation, that competing signal creates exactly the kind of electrical interference in that inspection panel that you do not want at 6:30 in the morning. Adding a 1/4 teaspoon of a high-quality mineral salt, not table salt, which is stripped of trace minerals, but a full-spectrum mineral salt containing magnesium, potassium, and sodium in their natural ratios, supports rapid plasma volume restoration in a way that plain water alone does not achieve, because plain water without electrolytes is absorbed more slowly and distributes less efficiently into the intravascular space. A 2020 paper published in Nutrients examined oral rehydration composition and its effect on plasma volume restoration speed and found that electrolyte-enhanced water achieved functional plasma volume restoration 44% faster than plain water in mildly dehydrated adults. 44% faster. That matters when the window you are working with is 15 minutes, not 2 hours. The third component addresses caffeine timing, and I want to be direct with you about something that the coffee industry has spent considerable resources ensuring you never think too hard about. Caffeine is a powerful adenosine receptor antagonist and sympathomimetic agent, meaning it mimics and amplifies the effects of your sympathetic nervous system activation. When you consume caffeine during the peak cortisol window, which research consistently shows runs from approximately 6 to 9 a.m. in individuals who wake between 5:30 and 7x. You are not adding stimulation to a neutral system. You are amplifying a system that is already at its daily stimulation peak. Think of the cortisol surge upon waking as a construction crew that has already brought full power to an electrical system for the day's work. Introducing caffeine into that environment is like running a second generator into a panel that is already at capacity. The wiring does not care that you needed the energy. It responds to the load. The research supported recommendation, and this comes from work published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews examining cortisol-caffeine interaction in healthy adults, is to delay caffeine consumption until 90 minutes after waking, at minimum, and ideally until after the cortisol peak has begun its natural decline. In practical terms, this means if you wake at 6:30 a.m., your first caffeine is consumed no earlier than 8 a.m. The fourth component addresses morning physical activity, and I want to be precise here because exercise is not the enemy. The timing and sequencing of exercise is the variable that the research distinguishes, and most morning exercisers are getting both wrong. A 2018 analysis published in the European Heart Journal examined cardiovascular event incidence in habitual morning exercisers versus afternoon exercisers with matched fitness levels and cardiovascular risk profiles, and found a statistically significant elevation in adverse cardiac events in the morning exercise group during the 6 to 8 a.m. window specifically, an elevation that disappeared when morning exercise was shifted to begin after a structured 20-minute warm-up and hydration protocol. The recommendation is not to stop exercising in the morning. The recommendation is to begin with 10 to 15 minutes of light movement, walking in place, gentle range of motion work, non-strenuous stretching, before elevating heart rate intentionally. This gives the baroreceptor system time to complete its calibration, allows plasma volume restoration from the hydration component to take effect, and allows cortisol to begin its natural post-peak decline before you are asking the heart to perform at exercise intensity. The fifth component addresses thermal exposure, and this is the one I find most people resist most strongly because cold shower culture has become deeply embedded in morning wellness mythology. I am not telling you cold exposure has no physiological value. The research on cold thermogenesis is real. What I am telling you is that acute cold exposure during the morning sympathetic activation peak, when cortisol is elevated, plasma volume is reduced, and peripheral vascular resistance is already high, causes a rapid additional increase in systemic vascular resistance through cutaneous vasoconstriction that measurably elevates cardiac afterload. Afterload is the pressure the heart must work against to eject blood. Think of it as the structural compression load on the central support column of that building. Your heart is that column. When afterload spikes suddenly in an already compressed morning vascular environment, that column is bearing a load it was not designed to handle without preparation. A 2015 study published in the International Journal of Cardiology documented a 2.1-fold increase in cardiac events in hypertensive patients who engaged in cold water immersion between 6 and 9 a.m. compared to those who used warm or tepid water during the same window. If you value cold exposure, take it in the afternoon. Your cardiovascular system will tolerate it with dramatically less structural risk once the morning activation cascade has fully resolved. Now I need to address what your doctor may tell you when you bring this protocol to them, and I want you to be prepared for that conversation rather than blindsided by it. When your physician tells you this is not evidence-based, I want you to ask them to look up the 2013 circulation study on morning platelet aggregability, the 2017 Journal of the American Heart Association analysis on orthostatic hypotension and long-term cardiac risk, and the 2018 European Heart Journal data on exercise timing and cardiac event incidence. Hand them the research. Most physicians, when they see peer-reviewed data in journals they respect, will engage with it seriously, but if they dismiss it without reading it, that tells you something important about where their clinical information is actually coming from. When someone tells you this sounds expensive, I want you to tell them that the entire morning protocol, the mineral salt, the sequenced hydration, the timing adjustment, costs less than $1 per day. I have watched patients spend that dollar and avoid hospitalizations that cost $60,000. The math is not complicated, and when someone tells you they have tried supplements and morning routines before and nothing worked, the answer is that they were given general advice applied to a specific biological window that requires specific sequencing, and sequencing is exactly what this protocol provides. This brings me to Case File 2023. A 67-year-old retired nurse from coastal South Carolina. I'll call her FN came to me after her second episode of morning hypertensive urgency in 14 months. Her cardiologist had increased her medication twice. Her morning readings were consistently the highest of her day, a pattern, by the way, that has a clinical name, morning blood pressure surge, and it is documented, researched, and almost universally underaddressed in outpatient cardiovascular care. FN implemented this exact protocol. 15-minute transition window. Electrolyte-enhanced hydration within 10 minutes of waking. Caffeine delayed 90 minutes. Light movement for 15 minutes before structured exercise. Warm shower only before 10 a.m. Within 60 days, her morning systolic readings had dropped an average of 19 points. Her cardiologist, to his enormous credit, looked at her data and said he wanted to understand what she had changed. That is the kind of physician conversation this information makes possible. Drop a 7 in the comments right now if you are going to implement at least one component of this protocol starting tomorrow morning. I chose that number specifically because in my 22 years of practice, 7 was consistently the number of days it took for patients to feel the difference when they addressed the morning window with the seriousness it deserves. Send this video to someone tonight, not later, tonight, who takes blood pressure medication, who exercises first thing in the morning, who starts every day with immediate coffee, or who has ever been told their morning symptoms are just anxiety or normal aging. You know that person. Text it to them right now. Somewhere in the next 24 hours, someone is going to wake up and walk directly into every one of these physiological stressors simultaneously, and you have the information right now that could change that outcome. Before you leave, I have linked the next video on screen. It covers the fourth mechanism I mentioned, but did not have time to fully address today, which is the role of magnesium depletion in morning cardiac arrhythmia risk. And I promise you that video will make everything I told you today even more actionable in your specific body. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, but because YouTube's algorithm systematically suppresses medical content that challenges standard pharmaceutical narratives unless enough people engage with it, and your subscription is how this research reaches the people who are running out of time to hear it. I have put together a complete written resource, the full protocol, the exact mineral salt ratios, the research citations with journal links, the timing schedule mapped to different wake times. It is called the Morning Cardiovascular Protection Protocol, and the link is in the description below this video. Get it. Go through it with your spouse, your adult child, your parent, and bookmark this video and come back to it, because the second watch is always where the cascade mechanism fully clicks, and when it clicks, your mornings will never look the same again. You now understand the biology of the most dangerous 60 minutes of your day better than the majority of practicing physicians in this country. Not because you are exceptional, though you clearly are for being here, but because this information has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals for over a decade, while the system that was supposed to deliver it to you was busy managing your symptoms instead of protecting your life. The window is real. The mechanisms are established. The protocol works. Do not wait until tomorrow to begin. Begin tonight by deciding that tomorrow morning will be different. Because for the people I could not reach in time, tomorrow morning never got the chance to be.